You don't look like you belong in first class." That's exactly what the flight attendant said, right there, in front of everyone, not whispered, not mumbled under her breath, but loud enough for 2 rows of passengers to hear it clear as day. The words dropped like a match in a dry forest. Passengers froze mid-step, heads turned, and just for a second, the buzz of boarding went silent. A white woman in a navy blazer, Freedom Sky Airlines name tag shining on her chest, stood blocking the path of a poised, calm black woman and her teenage daughter as they tried to enter row 1. The mother blinked, stunned but not surprised. The daughter clutched her boarding pass like it was a lifeline. The air in that first-class cabin shifted. Before we dive into this real-time story, where are you watching from? Drop your city below. And if stories about truth and justice matter to you, hit like and subscribe. This one stays with you. And now, back to the story. Her name was Dr. Naomi Pierce, a 42-year-old medical technology CEO who kept her success quiet. No designer logos, no entourage, just a tailored ivory blouse, dark slacks, a black leather purse, and an elegance you couldn't fake. Beside her stood Olivia, her 14-year-old daughter. Jeans, flats, a book pressed tight against her chest, eyes wide in quiet fear. Naomi calmly held out their 2 boarding passes to the flight attendant, Rachel Myers, who stared down her nose without reaching for them. "I'm going to need to verify those," Rachel said flatly, without even a glance at the names or seat numbers. "We've had some people trying to sneak up here lately." Naomi didn't flinch. "We paid for first class, seats 1B and 1C, booked through your airline's website a week ago. Would you like to scan the barcode?" Rachel took a half step back, looked toward the galley, and then muttered something into her headset. "Got a situation. First-class boarding, woman with a child, black, early 40s, claims she's supposed to be in row 1. Can someone confirm if that's accurate?" The pause after that word, claims, was heavy, purposeful, the kind that says more than a whole sentence. Naomi stood her ground, quiet but unshaken. Olivia squeezed her hand, eyes flickering toward the row of white passengers already seated and watching, pretending not to. One man in 1A gave a long sigh and muttered, "Here we go." Naomi turned slightly to shield her daughter from the stares. "Is there a reason this is happening?" she asked, voice firm but calm. Rachel crossed her arms. "It's just procedure. Ma'am, sometimes people assume they're upgraded and they're not. Happens all the time. But you didn't ask anyone else to step aside." Naomi replied, "Just us." Another pause. A colder one. "Let's not make this a thing," Rachel said. "We just need to get confirmation before you can take your seats." "I'm not making it a thing," Naomi said quietly. "You are." Olivia looked up at her mom and whispered, "Mom, we can sit in the back. I don't mind." Naomi bent down, eyes locked with her daughter's. "Sweetheart, we don't give up what we've rightfully earned just because someone questions us. Not ever." Her voice didn't shake. She didn't raise it. But you could feel the weight of every syllable. It wasn't just a mother talking to her child. It was generations speaking through her. From the back of the cabin, another attendant, Tina Rodriguez, approached cautiously. She'd heard enough to know something wasn't right. "Is everything okay here?" she asked. Rachel turned sharply. "Yes, thank you. I'm handling it." But Tina didn't walk away. She looked at Naomi, at Olivia, and at the boarding passes Naomi still held. For a second, something shifted in her eyes, concern, maybe even guilt, before she could speak. A man in a navy suit seated in row 2 leaned forward, speaking loudly enough for others to hear. "Can we just get this sorted? We're going to miss our slot at this rate." Rachel gave Naomi one last stare and said, Just step to the side. Please, let the other passengers board. Naomi didn't move. We were among the first to board for a reason. We checked in on time. If there's a problem, I'd like to speak to the captain. That won't be necessary, Rachel snapped. I said step aside. At that moment, a retired Army veteran named Jerome Brooks, seated in 2D, stood up. She has every right to be here. That seat belongs to her, and so does her dignity. His voice carried, not loud, but strong enough to silence a few grumbles. I've worn this country's uniform. I know what this is. And it's not protocol. It's profiling. Naomi nodded slightly in appreciation, but said nothing. She didn't need to. Her presence said enough. She stood there, not yelling, not pleading, just existing in a space that someone else tried to shrink. Olivia looked around, realizing she wasn't the only one watching anymore. Phones were slowly coming out. People were filming, whispering, choosing sides. But Naomi wasn't thinking about going viral. She was thinking about how many times she'd swallowed these moments. This time, she wouldn't. She couldn't. Because her daughter was watching. And because silence, even when polite, sometimes costs too much. Rachel stepped back, eyes narrowed. I'll get a supervisor, she muttered, turning away, and just as she did, a voice crackled through the speaker overhead, calm, measured, firm. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Please remain in your seats. I'll be stepping into the cabin briefly to address a concern. The air changed again. People straightened in their chairs. Tina's eyes widened. Naomi stood taller. The captain was coming, and no one, not Rachel, not anyone on that crew, was ready for what he was about to say. The silence in the cabin didn't last long. As Rachel Myers stormed toward the galley to get a supervisor, her footsteps hit the floor hard, almost like she wanted each one to echo behind her. Naomi Pierce remained where she was, rooted in place, her daughter Olivia by her side, the 2 boarding passes still in her hand, untouched. The overhead bins were wide open. The smell of brewed coffee drifted from the front galley. And yet all anyone could focus on was what just happened. A black mother and her child, standing at the entrance to first class, being told they didn't belong. It wasn't said outright, but it was heard by everyone. Tina Rodriguez lingered just a few feet away, uncertain. She'd been on this job long enough to recognize moments like this. You feel them in your stomach before you see them play out. And in this one, she wasn't proud of her silence. She glanced back at Naomi and Olivia, then toward the galley, then back again. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but she hesitated. Meanwhile, Olivia was shrinking, not physically, but emotionally. Her shoulders curled inward. Her hand kept tightening around her mother's arm. Naomi glanced down and gave her daughter's hand a gentle squeeze. We're okay, she whispered. We didn't do anything wrong. Olivia nodded, but her eyes stayed on the carpet. A passenger in 1A, Greg Hanley, a white businessman with a Bluetooth headset still tucked in one ear, leaned sideways and gave a quiet chuckle. Guess not everybody understands how reserved seating works, he mumbled, loud enough for Naomi to hear, but quiet enough to pretend he didn't mean her specifically. Naomi turned her head slowly toward him. She didn't speak, just looked, and in that look, there was more strength than 1,000 words could carry. Greg looked away, behind Naomi. Passengers were still boarding. Some offered quick, curious glances. Others kept their eyes down, rushing to their seats, pretending not to notice the tension playing out near the nose of the plane. That's how it usually goes. Some speak up, most don't. But not this time. One man, Jerome Brooks, the retired Army vet, stood from row 2 again. "Captain said he's coming out," he said, loud enough for Rachel to hear as she returned with a stern-faced colleague. "You might want to let him handle this now." Rachel shot him a look, then turned to the new crew member, Emily Carter, the onboard supervisor, who looked more tired than angry. "Rachel told me there's a seating issue," Emily said, trying to sound calm. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding passes?" Naomi handed them over without a word. Emily scanned them, checked her tablet, and blinked. 1B and 1C, confirmed. She looked up. "You are in the right seats." Rachel's face flushed. "Then why are they here before Zone 1? We haven't even pre-boarded families yet." Naomi gently raised an eyebrow. "We were among the first called, and we walked in when the door opened. No one stopped us," Olivia added, softly. "We were told to come straight through. I heard the lady at the counter say it was okay." Emily gave a small nod, then turned to Rachel. "There's no policy violation. They're fine." "It's not just about policy," Rachel said through gritted teeth. "It's about protocol, tone, attitude." Emily's brows furrowed. "Whose tone?" Rachel opened her mouth, but then paused. Unsure, Naomi spoke instead. "I've been calm. I haven't raised my voice, and I've followed every request. So I'd like to understand what, exactly, the issue is here." Tina finally found her voice. "She's right. I was here the whole time. Dr. Pierce didn't do anything wrong." Emily looked at Tina, surprised. But it was too late to pull back the curtain. Too many eyes had seen. "I'll let the captain know it's resolved," Emily said quickly, backing toward the galley. "They can take their seats." "Thank you," Naomi said, her voice still calm, but colder now. She gently guided Olivia to 1B while placing their bags in the overhead. As she moved, passengers parted like waves. No one said a word, but there was something in the air. Respect from some, guilt from others, and anger from one. Rachel stood stiff by the bulkhead, arms folded, jaw clenched. She watched Naomi settle into her seat like it was some kind of offense. Olivia sat beside her, back straight, hands in her lap, still clutching her book. Naomi leaned in. "We're okay," she said again, but Olivia's eyes brimmed with silent hurt. "Why do people think we don't belong?" she whispered. Naomi held her daughter's gaze. "Because they're afraid of what we remind them. That dignity doesn't come from money or titles. It comes from knowing who you are." Olivia blinked fast, nodded once, behind them. Jerome quietly gave Naomi a respectful nod. Across the aisle, Tina stood still, almost frozen, then turned and walked to the galley, her eyes shining with something close to shame. Emily tapped her earpiece and spoke into her mic. "Captain, we've resolved it. Passenger is in correct seat. Proceed when ready." But the captain didn't answer right away. A few seconds passed. Then the cockpit door clicked. It opened, slowly, and out stepped Captain Thomas Riley, 58 years old, gray around the temples, shoulders squared like he'd flown through storms harder than this one. He walked down the aisle slowly, eyes scanning, not rushed, not angry, just aware. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice calm and deep, "I'll be with you momentarily." Then he turned and walked straight toward row 1. All eyes followed. And just like that, the cabin went completely still again, because everyone knew something was about to shift. Captain Thomas Riley didn't say a word at first, as he stood at the front of the first-class cabin, just a few feet from Naomi and Olivia Pierce. The mood in the plane shifted from uneasy to electric. He took a moment, hands behind his back, scanning the row, measuring the tension like a pilot measuring wind before takeoff. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm and slow, with a weight that quieted even the whispering passengers. I understand there's been an issue with seating. Naomi turned her head to face him directly, her expression composed, but her eyes, sharp, clear, held more than just patience. They held a lifetime of moments like this. "Captain," she said, her voice steady. "There was no issue with seating, only with perception." The words didn't need to be explained. Riley nodded slowly. "May I see your boarding passes, ma'am?" Naomi handed them over again without hesitation. He looked down, cross-checked the tablet handed to him by Emily, and then back at Naomi. "Dr. Naomi Pierce and Miss Olivia Pierce, seats 1B and 1C, confirmed." "Thank you." He handed the passes back and turned to the crew. "These passengers are exactly where they belong. You will not ask them to move again." His tone wasn't angry. It was absolute. Rachel, standing by the bulkhead, shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I was simply trying to verify." "I read the incident report." Riley interrupted, his voice cutting through hers like a clean edge. "There was no incident. There was bias. And I won't have this flight compromised by it." Gasps flickered quietly around the cabin. Olivia looked up at her mother, wide-eyed, unsure what was happening but sensing the tide was turning. Naomi placed a hand gently over Olivia's and gave her the faintest smile. "Thank you, Captain," she said simply. But it wasn't over yet. Greg Hanley in 1A rolled his eyes and muttered, "This whole thing's a circus. All this for a show." That was it. Naomi turned toward him. She didn't raise her voice, but every passenger within 2 rows heard her clearly. "You don't get to reduce our presence to a show. My daughter and I boarded this flight like anyone else, with valid tickets, early check-in, and the quiet expectation of respect. If our very presence unsettles you, perhaps it's not our seat you're threatened by, but the story you told yourself about who deserves to sit in it." Greg opened his mouth, then shut it again. No comeback. Just a red face and silence. The captain turned to him next. "Sir, if you're uncomfortable, we can make arrangements for another flight." "No need." Greg mumbled, "I'll behave." "Good," the captain replied. "Because we expect professionalism from all passengers, not just the ones in uniform." He turned back to Naomi. "Dr. Pierce, again, my apologies. We'll depart shortly." As he made his way back to the cockpit, the cabin seemed to breathe again, but differently. This time, it exhaled tension and inhaled accountability. Tina Rodriguez approached Naomi quietly, eyes filled with regret. "I should have said something earlier," she said, voice low. "I saw how Rachel treated you. It wasn't right." Naomi looked at her, not with anger, but with tired understanding. "Silence is easy," she replied. "Speaking up costs something, but it changes everything." Tina nodded, her lips pressed tight. "Thank you for not backing down," Olivia finally whispered. "Mom, are we okay now?" Naomi turned to her daughter, smoothing a curl from her cheek. "We are," she said, "because we didn't let someone else decide our worth." In the row behind them, Jerome Brooks leaned forward and gave a short nod of respect. "That," he said to no one in particular, "is how you hold the line." Just as the captain returned to the cockpit, Emily stepped up beside Rachel, whose arms were now crossed so tight they looked like a shield. "Rachel," Emily said in a low voice, "we'll need to document this. Corporate's going to want a full statement." Rachel scoffed. "I followed protocol." "You followed your own assumptions," Emily said, not unkindly, but firmly. "And that's going to need correction." From 2 rows back, a passenger who'd remained silent the whole time now raised their phone slightly. The video had been recording for several minutes. Jason Wu, a tech developer flying home from a conference, gave Naomi a thumbs up from his seat. The internet's going to want to hear this, he said. Naomi didn't respond. She didn't need an audience. Her point had already been made without going viral. Olivia, now calmer, opened her book again, though her eyes lingered on her mother for a few more seconds. What she saw wasn't just a mom who stood up for their seats. It was a woman who taught her how to hold her ground with grace. The captain's voice came over the speaker again. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are now cleared for departure. Flight time today to Atlanta is 4 hours and 12 minutes. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for takeoff. The chime sounded. The flight attendants moved through the aisles, but no one moved with the same confidence they had before. Something had changed. Not just the mood, but the mirror they now saw themselves in. Tina caught Naomi's eye as she passed, offering a quiet but sincere, "Thank you." Naomi nodded back. She wasn't looking for thanks. She just wanted her daughter to remember this day not as the one they were told they didn't belong, but the day they didn't leave. The engines roared to life. The runway stretched ahead. And somewhere between injustice and altitude, a flight took off, not just into the sky, but into something deeper, something freer, something long overdue. The engines had just started humming when the cockpit door opened again. It was unusual, rare, even, for a captain to step out twice before takeoff. But Captain Thomas Riley wasn't finished. Not yet. He walked down the first-class aisle with purpose, his movements calm but precise, like a man carrying more than a schedule. He was carrying a message. The passengers hushed, sensing something important was about to happen. Naomi Pierce sat upright in 1B. Olivia still tucked quietly beside her. Though her posture had changed, she was no longer shrinking. She was watching, closely, curiously. The captain stopped just beside them and faced the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice firm but respectful, "I want to speak to you, not as your pilot, but as a human being." A ripple of surprise moved through the cabin. You could hear the sudden stillness, the rustling of jackets as passengers shifted in their seats to listen. "Before we take off today," Riley continued, "you deserve to know what just happened, and why I chose to step in." Rachel, standing stiff at the galley bulkhead, looked like she might speak, but Riley raised a hand without looking at her. "I'm not here to call anyone out, but I am here to remind all of us, crew and passengers alike, that how we treat one another matters just as much as how we fly this aircraft." A murmur of agreement bubbled from a few rows. "I've flown commercial and military jets for over 30 years, he went on, "and I've seen all kinds of people take these seats. CEOs, veterans, students, single mothers, kids flying alone. And let me tell you, dignity isn't something you earn with status. It's something you carry, and something you owe others, no matter where they sit or what they look like." That line landed like thunder in the silence. Tina Rodriguez, standing behind him, pressed her lips together, clearly holding back tears. Olivia stared at the captain like he was speaking directly to her. Maybe he was. "Earlier," Riley said, glancing toward Naomi, "a passenger was questioned, not because her ticket was invalid, but because of a judgment made before the barcode was even scanned. That's not how we operate on my aircraft. Not while I wear these wings." He paused, letting the words settle. "Dr. Pierce, I thank you for your grace. Miss Pierce, I thank you for your courage." Naomi nodded quietly, but Olivia, still holding her mother's hand, whispered, "Thank you, sir." Riley smiled gently. "I believe everyone in this cabin needed to see that, including me." He turned back to the rest of the passengers. "Now, I know some of you are in a hurry, anxious to take off, and frustrated by delays, but sometimes the right thing slows you down before it lifts you up. If we lose a few minutes but regain a little humanity, I'd say that's time well spent." An elderly woman in row 4 leaned toward the aisle and clapped once, then again, slowly. Others joined. Not a roaring ovation, but a sincere ripple of respect. It wasn't about heroics. It was about truth. Riley gave a small nod, then turned toward the galley. "Rachel," he said quietly but clearly, "you are relieved of duty for this flight. Another attendant will be joining us shortly before departure." Rachel's jaw dropped. "Captain, I don't want an explanation," he said evenly. "I want you to take time and reflect. We'll talk again when I'm back on the ground." She stood frozen for a second too long, then turned and disappeared through the front curtain, her departure unnoticed by no one. Tina moved forward to fill the gap. "Captain," she said, "thank you." "No," Riley replied, looking her directly in the eye. "Thank you for finally speaking up. You did what was right." Tina gave Naomi a look as she passed. Not an apology anymore. Something deeper. Solidarity. Naomi acknowledged it with a quiet nod. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She didn't need to. The truth had done the talking. Back in 1A, Greg Hanley tried to shrink into his seat. The man who earlier had mocked, mumbled, and muttered suddenly had nothing to say. Riley returned to the cockpit. Moments later, the chime sounded again. "Flight attendants, prepare for departure." And just like that, the energy inside the cabin was different. The turbulence wasn't gone, but it had shifted from injustice to awareness. Naomi reached into her bag, pulled out a paperback, and handed it to Olivia. "I think now's a good time to start this one," she said softly. Olivia looked down at the title, "Bold Women Who Changed the World," then up at her mom. "You should be in this book," she said. Naomi smiled. "Maybe one day. But today, I just needed you to see that we don't have to yell to be heard." Jerome Brooks leaned across the aisle again and said, "Young lady, what your mama did today, that's called strength. And don't you forget it." Olivia gave a little smile, her grip on the book softening. Tina came by, offering drinks as the plane began taxiing. "Can I get you something, ma'am?" "Just some water, thank you," Naomi replied. "And a little peace. I think we're all getting some of that today," Tina said with a knowing smile. Naomi looked out the window as the plane turned onto the runway, sunlight flickering off the wing. She let herself breathe, not because everything was fixed, but because, in one powerful moment, it didn't break her. She had held her place, and in doing so, reminded everyone what leadership really looks like. And as the aircraft lifted off the tarmac, carrying its passengers eastward, it also carried something else into the sky. Dignity, restored, at 30,000 feet, with the hum of the engines steady and the skyline now far behind. There was an unusual quiet in the first-class cabin, less of discomfort, more of reflection. Naomi sat with her seatbelt unbuckled now, her arm gently draped behind Olivia's seat, watching her daughter underline a sentence in the book she'd just started. The tension from earlier still lingered, but it had softened, replaced by something calmer, heavier, more honest. Passengers weren't whispering anymore. They were watching her. Yes, but not the way they had before. Not with suspicion, with respect. Olivia turned to her mother and said softly, "He really made them listen, didn't he?" Naomi gave a gentle nod. "Yes, he did. But more importantly, you listened too." Just a few rows back, Tina Rodriguez stood near the service station, sorting napkins but distracted. She hadn't stopped thinking about what Naomi said to her earlier. That silence is easy, but speaking up changes everything. She'd flown hundreds of flights, seen dozens of small injustices brushed off as policy or standard, but she hadn't always said something. Today, She did, and it mattered. She glanced over at her colleague Emily Carter, who was filling out a flight report on the jump seat tablet. "Are you going to file it under crew conflict?" Tina asked quietly. Emily looked up, shook her head. "No, I'm filing it under crew correction." Tina gave a half smile. "Same thing, isn't it?" "Not today," Emily replied. "Today we all saw something that pushed us to be better. That's not conflict. That's growth." Meanwhile, in row 1A, Greg Hanley had barely spoken a word since the plane left the gate. The usual swagger in his posture had vanished. He stared at the screen in front of him. A movie playing he wasn't really watching. Tray table still folded down. A glass of sparkling water sat untouched, every so often. His eyes flickered sideways toward Naomi and Olivia. He hadn't apologized, hadn't even looked them in the eye. But his silence now wasn't the smug kind. It was heavy with realization. At one point, he even reached up, pressed pause on the movie, and just sat back, arms crossed, looking out the window. Maybe he was seeing something out there. Maybe he was seeing himself. A chime rang overhead. The captain's voice filled the cabin again, this time gentle, routine. "Folks, we're cruising smoothly over Colorado now. Weather in Atlanta is a warm 82 degrees. We'll begin descent in about 2 hours. In the meantime, thank you again for your grace earlier, and for your attention. This world doesn't turn better on its own. Sometimes it needs a nudge, even at 3,000 feet." Naomi smiled softly at that. Olivia gave a tiny clap that no one else seemed to notice. Tina came by again, offering snacks this time. "We've got almonds, cookies, and this little granola bar that says it's healthy but probably isn't," she joked. Trying to ease the air, Naomi chuckled. "I'll take the cookie. No guilt today." Olivia perked up. "Can I have the granola bar?" "You sure you want the fake healthy one?" Tina asked playfully. "Mom always says the ones that say all natural usually have the most sugar." Tina laughed gently and handed it to her. "You're wise beyond your years, young lady," as she moved down the aisle. Tina stopped briefly beside Jerome Brooks, the Army veteran. "Thanks for stepping in earlier," she said. He nodded. "Some things you don't stay seated for." And then, to Tina's surprise, he added, "Captain Riley. He served in the Navy. You know, flew carrier landings. Not an easy man to rattle. But today, you could see it in his eyes. He was carrying more than flight duty." Tina swallowed. "He carried the weight for all of us. And he passed it on." Jerome said, "Now it's our job to carry it right." Just then, the cockpit door opened briefly. Captain Riley didn't step out this time, but he looked down the aisle, found Naomi, and gave a small, respectful nod. She returned it without a word, but her eyes held gratitude, not the kind drenched in spectacle, the quiet kind, the real kind, and that moment between them. One of mutual acknowledgement, of two professionals recognizing the roles they each played in restoring something that had been bruised, was one of the most human moments of the flight. Emily approached Naomi a little later, crouching beside her seat to speak discreetly. "I've worked 21 years in this airline," she began. "I've seen tough passengers, entitled passengers, rude ones. But you weren't any of that. And still, you were treated like a threat. I just want to say, your presence wasn't the problem. Our silence was—" Naomi didn't blink. She simply said, "Then let's not be silent anymore." Olivia looked between them, then asked, "Is this going to happen every time we fly?" Naomi considered the question, then replied with honesty, "I don't know, but every time it does, we'll stand the same way, calm, tall, together." Olivia leaned her head on her mom's shoulder. "Okay, That's enough for me. Around them. The cabin wasn't buzzing anymore. It was breathing, slower, heavier, wiser. A few rows back, Jason Wu was typing something on his phone. He wasn't editing a video. He had already shared the earlier recording on social media. Instead, he was writing a caption. Sometimes leadership doesn't wear a uniform. Sometimes she wears grace, and she brings her daughter with her. As the plane soared above the clouds, where light breaks clean through everything, Dr. Naomi Pierce closed her eyes for the first time that day, not because she was tired, but because, finally, she felt at peace. The descent into Atlanta began just as the sun began its slow dip westward, casting soft gold over the clouds beneath the aircraft, like a quiet reward after a storm. Freedom Sky Flight 162. One had become more than just a trip between two cities. It had turned into something else entirely, something no one on board would be able to explain quickly. The tension that once clung to the cabin had unraveled into something still, but not empty, not numb. It was reflection. It was grace. Naomi Pierce leaned her head gently against the seat back, her fingers running through Olivia's curls as her daughter dozed off for a few minutes beside her. The hum of the aircraft no longer felt cold. It felt warm, like a lullaby after a lesson. Passengers weren't speaking much, but they weren't avoiding each other either. They were thinking about how quickly a routine flight turned into a defining moment, about how easily bias slips in beneath smiles and protocol, about how simple human dignity, when protected fiercely and quietly, can shift the energy of an entire room, or in this case, a cabin. Tina Rodriguez, finishing up trash collection for the final descent, moved slower than usual. She wasn't stalling. She was savoring something. Maybe it was the way Naomi had made her remember why she applied to work in aviation in the first place, not just to serve coffee and pass out peanuts, but to serve people. She approached row one last time, her eyes softer now, her shoulders lighter. "Is there anything else I can get you, Dr. Pierce?" she asked gently. Naomi shook her head with a kind smile. "Just this. Keep standing up. Even when it's hard," Tina gave a small nod, her voice catching just slightly as she replied. "I will," a few rows back. Emily Carter sat on the jump seat, filing the final in-flight report. Only this time, it didn't read like the usual formality. She titled it, "Incident Resolved Through Leadership," and in the narrative section, she didn't just describe the confrontation. She described the correction, the moment a flight went from cold policy to compassionate practice. The moment a captain stepped out not to fly, but to lead. She didn't name names. She didn't have to. Those who needed to know would already feel it. Captain Riley's voice came over the intercom again, calm and sure. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our final descent into Atlanta Hartsfield. On behalf of the entire crew, thank you for your patience and grace today, and thank you for the reminder that sometimes, even in the skies, we can find our grounding in doing what's right." It wasn't the usual airline script, and no one missed that. Even the tone was different. It was human. And that, more than anything, had become the defining atmosphere of the flight. Greg Hanley, still seated in 1A, still uncomfortable, finally turned. He didn't speak right away. He seemed to fidget with something in his pocket, then looked toward Naomi and Olivia. "Look," he muttered, awkward and gravelly. "I was out of line earlier. I didn't know who you were, but even if I had, that's no excuse. I was wrong." Naomi regarded him for a moment, not with superiority, but with caution. Then she replied, "Thank you for saying that, but next time, try leading with respect, not recognition." Greg blinked and gave a tiny nod. "Fair enough," he said. Lesson learned. Olivia stirred and yawned, sitting up as the cabin lights shifted for landing. We're almost home? She asked sleepily. Almost, Naomi said, brushing a stray curl behind her daughter's ear. But you've already taken the most important flight of your life today? Olivia tilted her head. What do you mean? Naomi smiled. You learned that your worth isn't up for debate, that no one, uniform or not, gets to tell you where you belong. Olivia looked down at her seat, then back up at her mom. It felt really big, like we were being watched. We were, Naomi said. But more importantly, you were watching, and I'm proud of how you saw it through. In the back of the plane, Jerome Brooks folded his arms across his chest, a quiet smile under his gray mustache. He'd seen a lot in life, but today had cracked something open. He pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket and scribbled a sentence. Strength doesn't always shout, he wrote. Sometimes it sits in row 1 and holds her daughter's hand. On the ground, wheels touched down with a smooth roll, drawing a few soft sighs of relief, not just because they landed, but because they had gone through something together. A silent, collective exhale. As the plane taxied to the gate, phones buzzed, notifications popped. Somewhere in the back, Jason Wu's tweet had already gained traction. The video was being shared with captions like, "This is how you lead," and "Grace in action." But Naomi didn't know that yet. She wasn't thinking about going viral. She was thinking about getting Olivia safely off the plane, about dinner plans, about life beyond confrontation. As the cabin door opened, Captain Riley stood once more at the threshold, nodding goodbye to each passenger. When Naomi and Olivia reached him, he extended his hand first. Naomi shook it. "Thank you for stepping out," she said. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," Riley replied. "Not because of who you are, but because of who I need to be." Olivia smiled up at him and said, "You're the nicest pilot we've ever had." Riley chuckled. "Well, I've flown in war zones, but this flight taught me something new." "What's that?" Olivia asked. He leaned down slightly and said, "Sometimes the hardest landings aren't on runways. They're in people's hearts. And today, we landed something important." Naomi's hand found Olivia's shoulder, and the two stepped off the jet bridge together. Taller, stronger, unshaken. Behind them, the crew exchanged looks that said more than words could. This flight had changed more than its destination. It had shifted something deeper, and long after the wheels stopped rolling, that shift would continue, in policies, in people, and in the quiet decisions made at 30,000 feet that reach all the way to the ground. 3 days had passed since Flight 1621 touched down in Atlanta, but the ripple effects hadn't stopped. What happened on that plane? What began as a quiet act of prejudice and transformed into a national conversation about grace and accountability was now being written about in morning columns, discussed in boardrooms, and shared over dinner tables. Dr. Naomi Pierce had said nothing to the media. She hadn't posted a thing. She hadn't called for anyone's firing. And yet, the world knew. The video captured by Jason Wu had gone viral with more than 9 million views in 72 hours. The headline across every platform read the same. Black mother defends first-class seat with quiet strength. Pilot shuts down discrimination mid-flight. But for Naomi, none of that mattered as much as the handwritten note she found slipped under her door that morning at the Midtown Hotel. It was from Captain Thomas Riley. Simple. No fancy letterhead. No performative apologies. Just his own handwriting. In blue ink on plain stationery. "Dr. Pierce," it read, "I've flown across oceans, over mountains, through thunderstorms and still air. But your calm refusal to yield, that changed me more than any flight plan ever could. Thank you for holding the line when others faltered. We land better when we learn better. With respect. T. Riley. Naomi held the letter for a long while before folding it and placing it carefully inside her journal. Olivia walked in moments later, still wearing her robe, hair wrapped in a towel, and asked, "Is that from the pilot?" Naomi nodded. "It is." Olivia sat down on the bed, legs crossed. "They're still talking about it at school. My friends saw the video. Even our civics teacher played it during class." Naomi looked surprised. "She played the whole thing?" "Most of it," Olivia said. Then she paused and asked us what we saw. Some said they saw injustice. Some said they saw dignity. But she said what we really saw was legacy. Naomi's brows lifted. "Legacy?" Olivia smiled. She said legacy isn't what you leave behind when you're gone. It's what you create in the moment, when everyone is watching and you still choose to do what's right. Naomi let that sit between them for a while before asking softly, "And what did you say?" Olivia tilted her head. "I said I watched my mom teach the whole plane how to land." Naomi exhaled gently, moved in a way words couldn't quite express. She reached over and hugged her daughter, longer than usual. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for standing beside me. You taught me how," Olivia said. Meanwhile, over at the Freedom Sky corporate office in Dallas, a very different kind of meeting was happening. Flight 16. 21's crew logs were being reviewed. So were the social media clips, crew reports, and the customer service complaints that had quietly built up against Rachel Myers long before this flight. But what mattered more than past mistakes was the future they now had to face. In a bold move that stunned the industry, the airline issued a public statement titled, "A Commitment to Dignity at Every Altitude." The statement included an apology, not just to Dr. Naomi Pierce and her daughter, but to every passenger who had ever felt less than, overlooked, profiled, or unwelcome in a space they rightfully occupied. They announced a new company-wide initiative called Altitude with Integrity, a training and reform program that would be implemented across every flight crew, supervisor, and gate agent. And at the heart of the campaign, a quote pulled straight from Captain Riley's address to the cabin. "We don't just fly planes, we carry people. And with that comes the weight of decency." Naomi only learned about it when a reporter from NPR called asking for comment. She politely declined the interview. "This was never about a headline," she said. "It was about a lesson, and I believe the lesson has already been received." Back in Seattle, where she lived, she returned to her company headquarters quietly. No press conference, no social media blast, just her usual Monday morning routine. Walking through the doors of her biotech firm with Olivia's lunch packed and her heels clicking softly on the marble floors. But inside, something had shifted. A receptionist who barely used to look up now greeted her with a firm, "Good morning, Dr. Pierce?" A young intern waited near the elevator just to say, "My mom saw the clip. She said you reminded her of Rosa Parks." Naomi smiled. She didn't want statues or awards. She wanted reflection, growth, and maybe a gentler world for her daughter to rise in. On her office desk sat a small envelope. No name, no label, just a single sentence inside. "Your strength gave me mine, from Seat 4D. She knew exactly who it was from. Jerome Brooks, the retired Army vet who had spoken up when no one else would. And though she'd only nodded at him during the flight, that quiet exchange had clearly meant something. Later that day, Naomi opened her journal, tucked in Captain Riley's letter, and wrote just one sentence beneath it. "We didn't fly to Atlanta. We ascended into who we're meant to be." And that's what this story truly was about. Not punishment, not revenge, but clarity, restoration, the truth that sometimes justice doesn't roar, it rises, seat by seat, hand by hand, until a whole aircraft, a whole company, maybe even a whole country, realizes that belonging doesn't come with a boarding pass. It comes with courage. And on that one unforgettable flight, courage took wing, and it didn't land alone. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it. Sometimes, the smallest stand leaves the biggest impact.